I just want to say thank you so much for being here. We're excited to talk to all of you about the ins and outs of remote PI planning. I'm Laura Richardson, and I'm the head of sales for Applied Frameworks. I'm also an SPC, so I'm a SAFe person as well as a Scrum Master. And I'm happy to be hosting this webinar and basically featuring some experts here. So both Kim and Kevin have a lot to share with regards to remote planning and specifically for PI planning as well. So Kim, you want to just say a few words and then we'll also turn it over to Kevin.
Sure. I just wanted to say hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kim Premski, and I'm a principal consultant with Applied Frameworks. I work with a lot of different clients all over the country, and I also enjoy doing a lot of training. I'm a certified Scrum professional, and I'm also an SPC, so I'm a SAFe person as well.
Thanks, Kim. My name is Kevin Rosengren, and I'm coming at you from Richmond, Virginia. I think we may have some local folks here on the webinar. I think I can substantiate the claim that I was one of the first 5 product people to become an SPC about 8 years ago, and have really been in and out of working with SAFe for a while, and have seen some of the growth in SAFe as we go through the years. And I'm really excited about where it's been the last year in terms of really focusing on the customer, really focusing on the product, which is kind of the area where I get excited. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to sharing some thoughts around effective remote PI planning.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. And before we get too much into this, I wanted to check in with the audience here about how many remote PI sessions have you been involved in? And so I feel like we've made some assumptions about what those numbers might be, but I think it would be interesting for us as people discussing this, just to see, what the mix is for people in the audience. So any guesses what the results might be? I'll give people maybe 30 more seconds to answer the question. We've got a number of none. We have one person who's done more than 5. So I'm hoping that whoever you are out there who's done more than 5, definitely feel free to add some of your experiences into the chat as well. I'd be curious to see if some of the things that we're talking about definitely line up with your experience. All right, about 10 more seconds and we'll take a look at what those results are. All right, we've got a number of people here who have answered our question. So it looks like we're definitely weighted towards the have not done remote PIs yet. So go ahead and end that and I can share the results. So Kevin, Kim, looks like the majority have not done it at all. One person has done 1, and we have our expert on the line as well. So that sounds like a good mix.
And until recently, it's not something that SAFe has been really pushing, and there's some guidance that came out in the last year or so around distributed, but fully remote is just a really different animal for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Kevin, why don't I turn it over to you and you can kind of kick us off here.
Yeah, so thanks. So I don't have to remind everybody where we are. We are in a different world, a world that we hadn't envisioned a couple of months ago. And here we are in a world where face-to-face collaboration, something that we as a team really promote, has taken a different form. And this form is what we're experiencing right here. So collaborating face-to-face is different. And I think that's the key thing that we want to get across. Collaboration techniques, collaboration tools, collaboration processes have to evolve as we go along. The show must go on, and it's a hard thing. And we as a company have experienced this, and we've been destabilized by throwing into the mix a really tough situation with not being able to connect directly with our customers. And so as we stabilize, we have to keep our head above water and facing forward and looking at what's going on ahead of us, because we're going to need to collaborate. This is not going away anytime soon, and we need to find new muscles in collaboration in a world where face-to-face is not the world that we're living in. That's something different for SAFe, and SAFe has been really focused on a lot of face-to-face principles on which it's founded. is the best way to operate. Holding off on planning activities because we're not face-to-face is probably something that is not a good idea. And the reason why we believe this is because you've heard people talk about sort of a V-shape crisis with a huge steep downturn. I mean, a downturn faster than 9/11, faster than the Great Recession, and that equally is projected to be a steep up curve when we open the world up for business again. And that's different than what we've experienced before in past crises, where it's been kind of a gradual decline with some ups and downs, and then a gradual incline as we go further. So we believe that there's a potential for a V-shaped recovery, which means we've got to keep pressing forward. We've got to press forward with planning, and just planning in a slightly different way. So here's the challenges. We are all living that. I don't need to reinforce it. So let's go forward. So specifically thinking about remote planning challenges, right? There's several
Kevin,
things
before you go too much further, I'm actually curious about whether or not people on the call feel this pressure to delay or even cancel. But certainly I know that we all feel the pressure to like slow down, right? Things seem like they're going kind of fast. So I just put together a quick poll here to stick in between here. Sorry, I didn't give you a heads up on that, but how many people here have felt pressure to delay or postpone or cancel? And if you could give us some insight into that, that would be kind of interesting for me. All right, we have answers coming in. I'll share the results in just a minute, but thank you for being quick about answering on this one. Looks like it's a nice a range of answers. It looks like a couple people have delayed or are considering it, and about half have not. All right, so I'm sorry to interrupt on you there, Kevin, but here's the results.
Yeah, so no, this is a good sign, because it does keep our eyes facing toward the horizon. And so as we think about pressing forward and not delaying, let's just think about some of the challenges that we're facing in that remote collaboration. The one thing that I have learned in the last month or so is that this remote planning really reinforces this notion of it's a different animal. We can't just jump into something that took us a week or two to prep for in the past. We've got to think about an extended runway and treat things differently. The idea of a central collaboration, right, throughout the preparation, throughout the actual planning event is key. It just takes on a different form, and that different form will require some extended runway to prepare for it. And then communications. Communications are something that is planning nature of what we do during PI planning. So hallway conversations during the planning, preparation planning doesn't happen. Hallway conversations have to be prepared a little differently as we're all remotely. Logistics of those hallway preparations, of those preparations for the hallway conversations, we as product people have to think about it. We as RTEs and Scrum Masters have to think about what does it mean to prepare and to create those interconnections. During the planning itself, how do we connect our business stakeholders with our teams, with our product people, and maintain that in-person, as much as possible, collaboration and communication as we have. So those are the challenges that we face in moving to a remote format. So let's talk about the effective elements for a remote planning event. So advanced scheduling and preparation. We've got another webinar next week. We're going to talk about how to shape this and what advanced planning and preparation might be needed. I think Laura's going to follow up with an email. If you're not signed up for that one too, and you think you RTE or Scrum Master or user product person may be interested in that going forward, really going to get down to some logistics around that. So advanced scheduling, the logistics around coordinating the remote facilitation, and also thinking about who is best to facilitate that remote participation, both in your event as well as preparation for your event. We're going to talk about it a little bit here. We'll talk about it a little bit next week. So adding those logistics, identifying those people, doing the advanced coordination, very important. And then this idea of collaborations tools throughout this advanced timeline. We're going to talk a lot about this now here with Kim, and what do we see as the preparation events? How do we prepare for them? How do we do them in a remote way? but yet effective way to simulate that one-to-one conversation we have when we're all face-to-face. Good. Well, let me preview this, because this is the main event that we're focusing in on, right? 2-day PI planning stretched out into a longer 4-day event. I'm not going to go into depth on here, but I just want to set the stage for, we're looking to plan in advance. We're also looking to string out the actual event itself, because let's face it, none of us can sit in a chair and on video for 8 hours. Your focus tends to wane, and stretching this out over multiple days. We found this in our planning events. We find this in our training, very important. So we'll talk a little bit about logistics around that, the preparation around that with John next week. But I want to turn it over to my colleague, Kim, who's going to talk to you as part of a product perspective. What does that preparation look like, and what's that runway look like? So Kim, take it away.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Kevin. Well, you should be seeing a slide with quite a few words on it and the timeline here. And this is the important point that I want to drive home, is that in this independently remote environment, as I call it, we really need to be focusing on what is the right and appropriate timeline for preparation that may be very different than what we are accustomed to. So what this slide does is it outlines the critical preparation activities that we recommend for organizations to effectively plan for their PI in this independently remote setting, as well as the runway or the lead time that you would need to conduct each of these activities. So without reading into every single bullet, the items in black are really the things that the product team would be focusing on, and the items in orange are things that more of the RTEs and Scrum Masters would be focusing on from an execution and getting ready to execute perspective. And several of these wouldn't exist if we weren't in this independently remote environment. So, depending upon how you were used to conducting PI planning, maybe you were fully co-located, or maybe you were only partially distributed, you might not have had to have had this long of a runway. Maybe you could have pulled people together and gotten all of this done in a week or two in advance. But everything's different now. So, when you think about where we are, we have folks that are trying to meet their work commitments, but they also have family constraints that we're not normally used to having to deal with in our normal workday. It's also difficult to achieve consensus. I mean, you might have been able to get a decision in one meeting, whereas now that you're remote and there's a lot more back and forth and trying to get everybody engaged and aligned, that may take 2 or 3 sessions to get to that consensus. And I know I've worked with teams that used to just lock themselves in a room for a day or two and say, all right, we're gonna plow through this, we're gonna get ready. You can't do that. So how do we adjust, and what are some tools and collaboration frameworks that we could use to help us be more effective? So as you can see here, we recommend 4 weeks, a good 4 weeks in advance of your PI to be able to effectively plan and make sure you're ready. Now, obviously we had a lot of bullets listed on this slide, but what I want to hone in on is a couple things, 4 things in fact, that are in the 4-week and the 3-week lead time. And what my hope is in this webinar, because I've been in a lot of webinars where I've gotten some great ideas about what I need to do, but what I want to focus on in this webinar is how can I do this? How can I actually achieve these 4 things in this remote way? So hopefully you'll feel that a little bit more, maybe walk away with a few more ideas versus just, this is what I need to do. So that's the idea here. So let's go ahead and get into it, Kevin. So this slide here talks about the first bullet in that list, which was identifying your portfolio allocation. And there's 2 dimensions to this as I see it. So what I'm showing you here is a 3 horizons framework. The 3 horizons framework was developed by McKinsey, and it is a strategy framework. So the idea here is that this framework helps companies balance what they need to continue to run a profitable business today, and that's reflected in Horizon 1, where they want to be in the future, and that's reflected in Horizon 3, and then what are all the things that need to happen to get them there. And so that's really the items in that Horizon 2 timeline. And if you want to be competitive, then you can't only focus on Horizon 1 and never give any thought to what your future goals and the innovation and activities that need to occur. But likewise, you can't starve your current business because you're so focused on what's next. And so how do you find that right balance? So, if you are a SAFE practitioner, you know about lean portfolio management, and you know that this helps to, create the budgets and guide the investments and create those guardrails that are needed for the value streams in the arts. And so that all flows down, right? So that LPM defines what it should be for the value stream, and then the arts inherit that. But then PI over PI, each art then needs to make sure that they are adequately planning within those budgets and the guardrails that have been set. So this is a great framework to be able to do this.
So Kim, one of the questions that I want to make sure that we ask, because I'm asked this often as well, is, okay, this is great, right? You have to figure out what are our existing allocations, what do they look like, and then do we want to make some adjustments based on what's happening? So who's part of that conversation, right? This is a really helpful framework. I think it's great. But if we're going to collaborate around understanding where we're at, who is part of this part of the conversation? Who should you be inviting?
Well, so it obviously depends on, which level of SAFE you're implementing, but, that might include solution managers, it might include product managers, business managers, really anyone that is helping to set, more of that strategy level, not getting as much into the lower level tactical work that needs to be done.
And bringing in those business owners and architects and solution designers and whatnot into the conversation here can help you reinforce that the train is actually lining up the solutions by horizon here. And the fact that I think you made a really good point earlier, Kim, is, hey, even if you are aligned last PI, every PI you should be readjusting and realigning to what's happening in the marketplace. I mean, we've seen a significant change here in the last month or two, which may push us into this horizon one, which may be the right answer. But collaboratively, we need to arrive at that answer together, not just simply fall back into what feels good and feels right. And so I think using this technique, it becomes even more important when we're distributed, because we're not having those hallway conversations. We're not hearing each other's assumptions. We're not necessarily hearing how people are changing their approach over the course of weeks, where the world shifts so dramatically. So I think it's really important. We have a lot of change in our business right now to do this, and it's really important to use a collaborative framework to do this, because we're all in our own homes. We're separate. We're not having those hallway conversations. We're not talking, past each other's doorway from time to time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think what you're alluding to is to not assume alignment, right? Just because alignment had been achieved at some point in time. I can't remember who said this to me once, but the actual act of being aligned is this momentary slice of time. And as soon as that moment is over again, assuming alignment is no longer fair, right? So at some point, you're not aligned anymore. The moment you are. And so it's, you have to revisit it every once in a while, because teams tend to go out of the.
Well, and especially as we're in our, individually distributed. I like how you said that, Kim. Like, it's really important for us to have those specific collaboration times, collaboration frameworks to bring those folks together, to bring that alignment together. If anything, it's just reconfirming. So can you talk a little bit about the tool that we like to use to do that?
Right. So what you're looking at here on the left is actually that solutions framework from McKinsey, but it's represented in a tool called Weave. And we use that a lot here at Applied Frameworks, as Laura and Kevin, we use it quite extensively. And so this is a great way for folks to be able to access a common point. The way I see this is, you use a tool like this to move things around and put things in the horizon so that everybody has that visual representation of it. And then this is the conversation element of it. And then from there, you can say, okay, based on what we have here, how might we then translate that into like a pie chart allocation, for instance? What does this actually mean for us? And so then you can create something that's a little bit more definitive around how much is in Horizon 1, how much is in Horizon 2. And the thing that I really like about using these frameworks, obviously you can use them when you're not distributed as well, but they become critical when you're distributed, especially each person in distributed, is that it persists the conversations, right? So if you think about a meeting that you're in and everybody's going in every which direction, and then I don't know about you, but I've understood what we agreed to, but I'm not quite sure. This is like a photograph, right? You take a picture and you might have forgotten about that event, and then you see that photograph and you're like, oh yeah, I remember, and then suddenly everything comes back. So it creates that's what I think is really powerful about using these types of frameworks to be able to basically recreate those conversations again.
Yeah. So the way I look at it too is the framework, the three horizon framework, helps aid the conversation. The tool helps bring folks together in a more central way, even though we're distributed, and that it can help derive that articulates the alignment that's achieved through the conversation here, and that forms the basis of what you're going to do in the next couple steps.
Exactly. Yep, you got it.
Cool. All right.
All right, so I'm still talking about portfolio allocation. I said there were two dimensions. And so the second dimension of portfolio allocation, once you've kind of settled on, how much in Horizon 1, 2, and 3 do we need to invest in? Well, now you also need to be thinking about your investment, themes or your epics and so forth, and aligning on how much do you want to invest in new feature development versus infrastructure versus maintenance versus tech debt, all these other things that need to happen. So how do you do that? So that's really this next dimension, if you will. So, a lot of companies just, and I see this all the time, they just want to focus on new features, new features, new features. And then again, they starve some of these other really needed, investments and activities. So they start to pile up their technical debt, or their infrastructure starts to fall apart. Another way you could look at this, so I was once working with a software as a service company. And so software as a service, right, it's cloud-based, like supposed to be, kind of shareable by everyone. And over time, they actually lost their way with their core product. They ended up building so many custom requests for their clients that they got away from actually investing and building out their core platform. So they didn't have new things that they could offer up and sell and try to gain more business, because they were doing all these custom requests. And when they started to map it out and do that portfolio allocation, they actually realized that 70% of their features, if you will, their new feature development was actually custom requests. Only about 30% was investing in the core portfolio. So once they came to that realization, each PI, they started to kind of set new guidelines for themselves. Like, okay, we're going to start to slowly turn the tables on this. So as they would get a custom request in, they would look at it and say, is this something we can engineer into our core platform? Or maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe it's actually against the grain of where we want to go with our core platform. And consequently, we don't want to even do it at all. And so they were able to shift that from 30-70 to 70-30 actually over time. And so I use that as an example of how when you really map out your portfolio, it can be very powerful.
If I understand what you're saying, Kim, it's they were just not being intentional about the decisions they were making. They were reacting out to that. Yeah. So yeah. What this framework, the sliders framework, allows us to do is be more intentional about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so it's kind of, I think this one's really fun. I like this. So basically on your left axis here, or the left-hand side, is where you break out all the different areas that you would potentially want to invest in. And then the middle of the slider is the max, right? So if you picture everything, in this case, 4 times 3, everything, you can only have 12, right? 12 points, if you will. And so if you move something to the left, then something else is going to have to shift to the right or stay where it is. And so that you can get that right mix. And so again,
sorry to interrupt him, but what I always love about this, I know you bring this into all of the courses that you do as well, it's sort of like reminding people that you have a constrained economy, right? It's like if you increase some focus of a particular, increase your investment somewhere, that means you have to decrease it elsewhere. So I think, Kevin,
Absolutely.
it kind of gets back to what you were talking about, was if you accidentally do that without, knowingly creating alignment around that, that's where companies find themselves getting into trouble.
That's right. And especially in this distributed world, the intentionality of the conversations to gain alignment is important. And that's why we're sort of bringing that into this conversation. You may be doing this now, you may not be doing this now, but the importance of it now, which is really underscored, is that you don't have the natural connectivity of being co-located or being distributed in groups to have this shared understanding. And so here we are again, bringing back together on a different dimension to ensure that in this constrained economy of the next PI, we're intentional about thinking about new features and custom features. So like Kim said, if you want to up custom features to say a 5 in this framework, you've got to bring something down 1 or 2 notches. And that is what will help you ensure that the conversation occurs. So, if you've got a technology team that's really pushing to build out the infrastructure and a sales team that's really building out these custom features, you're going to have that conversation and say, hey, how's that going to take precedence as we go into the next PI? And the reason why we do this now 4 weeks in advance is because we've got to get that alignment right now, right, Kim? I mean, you can't leave this initial stage of planning without this alignment in the investment horizons, without alignment in the portfolio mix, so that you can take it to that next step.
Right. If you don't do it now, then what's going to happen is that when things start to shift to the teams, then they're potentially going to be spending their time, trying to break down epics and features and stories and so forth, and for things that aren't even about to be considered. So they need to have an understanding of what the direction is for the PI. And I wanted to highlight something else you said really quickly, Kevin, because you were talking about the need to do this now, and that folks may or may not be doing this. Particularly in this uncertain time, I think that there's probably more of a focus on, maybe wanting to stick with what like maybe a little bit of fear, like let's wait and see before we invest in this new thing. Let's wait and see before we, take on this new R&D project, for instance, because we just don't know what the world's going to look like in the next 2 or 3 months. That might be the right answer. The point is, let's make sure that everybody's aligned that that is the right answer. And that could potentially be missing in some
the last time we were all in the office, this is the picture we saw. Now we're getting ready for the next PI. We've all been in our houses for the last 3 weeks. If you can't tell, I'm getting a little stir crazy. We got to make sure that we're aligned to where we're going in the next couple of weeks to the next PI. So,
yeah,
and I've done this in Miro, and I think we can also do this in Weave as well. But again, that central collaboration tool is helpful in a distributed remote environment, so that we can all focus our attention and ensure that we're seeing and agreeing on the same thing, which will produce the outcomes of an artifact that says, okay, we've got the horizon mapped out. We've got the investments in each horizon mapped out. Now, here's the mix from a portfolio perspective that we're going to go from, yep, we're good with that, gang, good. Now we can go into that next step in the planning process.
While you guys are talking about that, you've mentioned we use Weave to do this. We know that Miro can do this. I've actually put together some really basic stuff, even using Google Jamboard for something like this.
Yeah, right.
So while we're talking about tools, I know this webinar isn't designed to go deep into any particular tool set, but at Applied Frameworks, we love to use Zoom because Zoom supports the breakout rooms that need to happen. We love to use Weave because of really supports kind of the collaborative decision making. It has a lot of these frameworks built in. We use Miro a lot. So for the folks on this call, it would be great if you would type into chat some of the tools that you have access to that you're starting to think about now. It's like, okay, conference call stuff might be pretty basic and expected, but things like Weave or Miro or even some Google tools. If you could just add into the chat what you think you might want to take a look at or what you're planning on using, that would be interesting, I think, for all of us on the call.
Yeah, especially that remote planning expert.
Yeah.
Good.
Great.
All right.
So, so we just, with these last 2 slides that we just talked about, we kind of were focusing on that portfolio allocation, which was in that 4-week lead time. And then also in that 4-week lead time, we mentioned the need to be able to narrow down your target features. So how do you have conversations with folks about what are the epics and the areas of investment that we want to focus on for this PI, right? We know what the allocation is, but we need to be able to narrow down this list, because more than likely we're not going to have the ability to fit all of it into the PI. So there is a framework that we really like to use a lot at Applied Frameworks called Prune the Product Tree. And in this case, we're using the metaphor of a tree to represent the PI. And then the apples on the tree represent the various investment areas or epics that are being proposed for this particular PI. So I don't know if you can see in the slide here, you know, I have like little words describing down at near the trunk of the tree, features closer to the trunk should be done sooner. And then items that are higher up in the canopy of the tree, they're not quite as high as in priority. So when people are first coming into this discussion, they are all walking in with kind of their blinders on, if you will, that these are our highest priorities. But now you're putting them all on the tree. And then now you're taking that step back and you're looking collectively, you know, across the organization. And now suddenly the thing that was really high in priority for you, you realize it's not as high of a priority when you look at the bigger picture. And so that's what this tree allows you to do. So that tree is going to grow over time. You have more PIs in the future. And so you can start to represent that more visually. And again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, like this creates that mental photograph for people, you know, about how did we arrive at that solution. So I love this one, as you both know.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites too. And the terrific part about where we are in that planning horizon, now is the time to bring in that collaboration with customers. And a lot of us do collaboration customers face to face. Well, this is a way to do collaboration customers remotely. And you know, we've used this particular framework to bring in not only stakeholders internally to align on that evolution of these features. And of course, we're mapping back to that product mix that we have, that feature and epic mix that we had mapped out earlier. But now we can bring in the voice of the customer and talk about epics and features in that vein, so that we can bring that data to the table as we begin to hone in on that feature set for the next PI. So, you know, using this framework to collaborate internally is terrific. Bringing in the customer voice, and you can even do this consistently throughout each PI, but certainly as you're, you know, probably 3.5, 4 weeks out here in this time frame, you can bring in the voice of the customer and play this with the customer. And again, that's using Weave, and you can do that with Miro. You can do that with Jamboards, just to be able to bring in the voice of the customer to see how they believe some of these features change over time. Once you do that, by the way, you can bring back in your architects, your business owners, to share back that voice of the customer, that view. And if you're spending maybe 30%, 40% of your time on architectural things, you can use this little enabler feature, this little word droplets we've got here in the mix, to ensure that, okay, as we think about these features, what needs to support them, and how much time and energy and effort of our product mix of our portfolio mix are we using in this next PI to support what's coming next. Does that make sense? So we're bringing in voice of customer, we're bringing in the collaboration with internal stakeholders and other product folks, as well as overlaying that customer voice, overlaying that portfolio mix. And we're all doing this well in advance of that day that we show up virtually for PI planning in preparation. So this is all of that preparation work to get to that first day of planning.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you talk about that, you know, how frequently you can bring in the customer. You know, one of the things and you know, that I struggle with, and thinking about companies are struggling with, right, is, okay, well, you also have this now newly remoted workforce where everybody is now sitting at home, at least for a period of time. And so how do you keep the broader organization included in the energy around all these solutions that are being built? Yeah. So, you know, I was just talking to somebody yesterday where, you know, they're planning on using this framework to kind of engage with their customer service reps who are actually talking to customers from home. And they're just as excited about, you know, creating a better future as anybody else is, right? And so, if you can't easily get to the customer, a lot of companies have an easier time getting to their own customer service representatives.
Right.
Invite them to take a look at this kind of thing. And if you use platforms like Weave or some of the other ones we've been talking about, it's not a difficult thing to do at all, right? And it really keeps the workforce connected at a time when they feel disconnected.
Yeah, I've used that when I've built a lot of tools for both internal folks as well as external folks, that if you have those customer service folks at your disposal, having a framework and getting involved just pays dividends.
Yep.
Hey, Kim, one thing that I wanted to bring up and ask you is are these steps purely sequential, or can they be intermixed and sort of do a wash, rinse, and repeat?
Right. Well, I mean, I kind of feel like everything that we do is a little bit iterative and incremental.
Right.
I mean, obviously, you've got a limited window of time with which to prepare. Yeah. And so, worst case scenario, if you're kind of just following that path on through, at least you've touched on all of those touch points. But I would certainly expect that if you're having conversations, here using this framework, that maybe, it raises some questions like, oh, okay, so maybe we should be thinking about doing a little bit of Horizon 3 work. Yeah. Based on the conversation here, do we need to kind of go back? So I feel like it's a bit of a dance. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to get into like an analysis paralysis type situation, but there is definitely that iterative and incremental approach to this for sure.
Interspersing it, even farther out in the time frame to get some initial data, then go into your portfolio planning, and then come back and hit this narrowing stage is good. All right, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I mean, the way our slide deck is, it's like 4, 3, 2, 1. But I mean, which is, obviously what we're proposing, but that doesn't mean that you close the door and never shall you have the conversation again. Yeah. So what we've been talking about so far really kind of fell into our 4 timeline, and now kind of moving into like that 3-week runway. So if you've been able to have that portfolio allocation conversation, you've been able to have that focus and conversation about areas of investment. The reality is, even if you've put some of those things at that bottom part of the canopy of the tree, closer to the trunk, you're probably still not going to be able to get to all of it, based on whether, you have dependencies, or whether you have, budgetary concerns, or just bandwidth overall. And so being able to then further refine and get to that more definitive list, one way that you can do that is using this FundAFeature framework. Again, a lot of these I've been bringing up use Weave, just because that's a really popular tool that we subscribe to. We just like the way it, the flexibility that it provides us. Correct me if I'm wrong though, I'm only aware that Weave is the only tool that I'm aware of that can do this.
I think this is the only tool that we can do remotely and electronically FundAFeature. You can do it in person as well using the same framework, but Weave is the only thing I found that has been able to do this constrained collaborative game, innovation game with customers or our stakeholders here.
Yeah, I mean, I've done it in person, but I've only ever done it online through Weave. So I just
think it's the only way to do it, for sure.
But the concept here, if you can see, and the numbers are a little bit small in this slide, but the idea is that you would have different participants joining this online forum. You would have either an actual budget, or kind of a perceived, sort of fictitious budget that you would potentially work from, and that you're probably going to have more items than what your budget can afford. And so then you have to work collaboratively together, again, across all of those different areas. So not coming in with just your blinders on anymore. Now you're collectively saying, okay, for the good of the organization, what are the things that need to be funded and worked on first? And how am I going to work with my colleagues to fund these features? And so again, it's pretty fun. It's very collaborative. And in the end, you can't walk away with everything half funded, right? You have to actually be able to fund things in their entirety, and that's how you come to that new consensus.
And Kim, this is the first time we're actually bringing in that constraint of cost, and cost could be in time and dollars and whatnot. And so thus far we've been thinking about this portfolio allocation in the sort of the intangible of how we split it up. Now we actually put a size on some of these budgets, and we put a size on some of these features. And so you're bringing in some technologists to help here?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, at this point, you want to start to bring in some other people that can speak to some of those other constraints.
Right.
So really the people that you believe that could best help make some of these decisions.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the best thing about this, and I love this, I mean, the thing is, I love all these frameworks that we're talking about today. That's why we collaborated together to bring them to you, because we feel like they are some of the best in helping plan, not only for PI, but and they're great remote collaborative frameworks. This really allows both stakeholders and customers the ability to talk and collaborate amongst themselves to ensure that what is important is funded. And yeah, you constrain the budget because budgets are always constrained. I've never been in an environment where we could do everything we want. We had more resources than items to think about. So this, I think, is a real life scenario. And really, when we go back to thinking about the things on the near term horizon here on the tree, well, we may not be able to fund all of those things. So let's put that lens of size, let's put that lens of budget constraint, put it in the hands of stakeholders and customers to collaborate together to come up with what it is that really kind of rises to the top in terms of those next features for the next PI. And I've done this with many participants, 100, 150 participants when I'm doing planning before. I think just the more voices you can bring into this conversation, the more rich the data is. And it's both the data in terms of the funding, and also has how people talk about it. And I don't know if you, Laura or Kim, have some more thoughts around this.
Well, I think what you've alluded to this, I think both of you have, but the other thing that I think is important is that in order to generate alignment, I think people need to be part of the conversations, even if at the end of the day, they don't always get 100% of everything that they wanted. Being included allows people to see how difficult the trade-off decisions actually are. And so when the final result kind of comes out, and this is what's going to be put forward into PI, people, because they've been part of more of the conversations along the way, can see the logic behind the choice, even if it's not their first choice. So you tend to go, you go faster, right? When you generate alignment in a collaborative, bigger net kind of way.
And it's so hard in a distributed manner to get that alignment. And
right.
These are those techniques that we feel help you bring collaboratively the conversation to a remote place, but yet still focuses on here's where we are, here's the outcome that we are arriving at after this collaboration.
Yeah, well, those decision-making frameworks really are kind of the secret, powerful toolkit that product people and that RTEs and Scrum Masters, they really need to extend their toolkits with those things, especially online, right? Because that's how you focus the conversation. That's how you keep people on the right topic. That's how you create the alignment. That's how you end up with the action plan at the end, right? We've all been in those meetings where we're not even sure if what we're supposed to be doing when the meeting's over, right? So frameworks, decision-making frameworks are those, those tools that focus and create action afterwards. Yep. And like Kim said early on, right, it is the durable result that isn't some of these meeting notes, but it's this, a very specific visceral thing about, oh yeah, here's where we are. And when you have to take up the conversation again, you can start off where you left off last time in a much easier way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, we're saying like, hey, like, let's do this stuff and do this planning and preparation, 4 weeks and 3 weeks out. And so maybe there were some companies like before all of this hit that had done that. And then now they need to pivot very quickly, right? And maybe they're only, a shorter time frame out. If they've gone through these activities, use these frameworks, come up with these decisions, they don't have to start from square one, right? They go back and they adjust some things, they tweak some things, but they're not having to reinvent the wheel now suddenly because the world has changed a little bit. And so I think, again, that's part of the power of these frameworks as well.
Yeah.
So the last point that I wanted to bring up, it's actually that that fourth key bullet of the many in the list that we presented to you, and that is around being able to decompose these epics and these features into those smallest units of value. And so, and Laura and Kevin will have to stop me on this because I could talk for hours about these topics, very near and dear to my heart. But the INVEST framework, which is around how do you break things down? How do you structure your backlog items such that they meet all of these criteria? And if you want to have your teams, breaking the work down small enough so that they can fit into the sprints, but then they need to stand on their own. So this is really key. This is where I see a lot of teams struggle, is that they tend to break their work down into like these very technical components and things. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to do this, but we need this, also needs this, and needs this to be a complete thing. So being able to break down backlog items into these independent, standalone, stand on their own, features, that's what allows for the negotiability when you get into PI planning. Because then what happens is you've got these teams that have broken work down. And it's like, okay, well, we're not going to have enough time to pull this in. Well, if you don't pull this in, you can't pull this in or this in or this in. If we don't do this, all these other things are going to be dependent on that. Well, that's because, you probably didn't apply the INVEST criteria, quite in an effective way, really focusing in on what is that sliver of value. And when I talk about these slivers of value, I'm talking about focusing in on vertical slices. So our teams like to talk in terms of, here's the middleware layer work that I need to do. Here's the UI work I need to do. Here's the database work that I need to do. And what we need to do is flip that on its head and say, what's a small sliver of functionality that cuts through the UI, through that middleware, through that database layer to deliver something that is, functional and a sliver of value to a customer. There are several patterns that you can apply that can help you with that. And I'm not going to go into detail on that, but I've actually written a blog on it. It's on our website. I also have a recorded talk on our website.
I actually put the link to your blog post in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Very cool.
Folks can get to it from there.
Yeah.
And I think the link to the recording, I think you gave a 1-hour talk on that. That's also buried in the blog post. So
right.
For anyone who wants to go a little bit deeper in story slicing, go ahead and grab that out of chat.
So Kim, when you think about doing this, this action happens in the normal course of teams and Scrum as part of refinement. Teams don't normally do this distributed, right? And so I think one of the things that's important to consider is to get a head start on this decomposition of the features, even as they're starting to emerge and may not make the cut fully, but as we're starting to get a clearer picture about what's going to be in the PI, doing this sooner rather than waiting until the end is going to be more important, because it takes teams longer to break these things down. And this goes back to that communications point, this bidirectional nature of, when you're in a refinement session with a team and you're all working and talking at the same time, it's so hard to do that on videos. So you might actually consider using the breakout rooms in Zoom, right? To bring folks together, have some people work on decomposing, bringing it back together in the main conversation. It just seems to be, it's hard. It's going to be harder to do remotely than it is in person. Can you talk a little bit about how you've done that remotely? And then are there any tools that you've used to help teams do this effectively?
So one of the things that we've done in the past, so the breakout rooms are huge. Like I'm a humongous fan of breakout rooms. I think that the first thing is that the product owner hopefully is disciplined and well-versed and well-educated in how to go about this. And certainly I spend a lot of my time coaching product owners, coaching product teams, doing talks, doing videos and so forth to help with this. But if the product owner has been able to take that initial stab, then they might not have figured out exactly everything. Like they don't have the context from the development team. So if you go into Zoom, you do some breakout sessions and say, this is how I, as the product owner, was thinking about how we might be able to slice this. You tell me, development team members, would this really work? So you can do it that way. Another way that you can do it is just by using really any kind of Miro or Mural or some of those other tools where you can bring like sticky notes over and have the team brainstorm and say, okay, here's our larger feature. Let's just let's do some breakouts. And I feel like it works better in breakouts. So if you have a team of, say, 8 people, maybe break them out in pairs, or maybe break them out in groups of 2, because they're going to engage a little bit more in the conversation if you do that and say, okay, here's the feature. Here's a few ideas of how I have to break it down. Let's do our breakouts. Just do some brainstorming with some sticky notes, and let's talk about how we might be able to break these down further. Come back together as a larger group and compare.
Your technique of using the Zoom breakouts, but yet still using a central collaboration tool, be it Weave, Mural, or any of those other guys, or even just Google Docs, allows you to break out, but yet still have that central place. And so I know that I found that when working with teams is having a central place, even if you're in breakouts or different phone calls or different video calls, to bring it back together so everybody can see and visualize how this is mapping out is an effective tool. So
yeah. And I know this isn't viable for everyone, but I cannot express the power of being able to use video. I mean, I realize that, for a forum like what we're on today, video doesn't necessarily make sense. I mean, obviously the 3 of us presenters being on video, I think hopefully is helpful to the participants versus just like this voice and this, black box coming at you. But when you're trying to collaborate with these folks, being able to emphasize the use of video is so powerful. I was talking to somebody and they were like, yeah, when you join a video call where you're actually supposed to be collaborating like that, and you turn your video off, it's like no different than walking into a meeting room with a bag over your head. And I just thought that was a really comical analogy, but I'm like, you know what, like that kind of makes sense to me. Like it's really hard to interact with the folks when some people are on video and some people aren't. And I realize it's not ideal for everyone, but if you can do it, it makes a world of difference.
Yeah. Yeah, so I know we're coming up towards the end of our time together here. If anyone has any questions, put them in the chat. And we're committed, by the way, if we don't get to them in this webinar, we will get back to you either in an email or when we follow up, we'll be sending a link to this recording and we'll include answers to additional questions in the email follow-up that we give you. So it's not going to be a waste of your time to stick them in the chat. We'll address them in that follow-up email. But I feel like this is what people are struggling with is this combination of like the planning steps, when we're supposed to do them, who's the right people to invite, what's the right tool set we need to be considering, right, to support these efforts, and then what's the biggest miss, like what's the thing that we might forget to do or not do well that we're going to regret when we get into the planning session itself. And I want to hear from both of you, but I feel like it has to do with time and testing, right? There isn't a perfect tool and there isn't, the perfect set of people that you're supposed to invite to these things. Cause, even in an in-person setting, you sometimes miss, right? And you forget to invite somebody who was kind of key stakeholder. So if you stretch out this planning and you put it with time a little bit better, then you give yourself some time to have 2 or 3 meetings when you really thought you'd only need 1. And if a particular tool or framework isn't quite nailing it, you have time in your schedule to adjust and try something else. So my takeaway is time. I know Kevin or Kim, if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think that everything, and it's really hard for me sometimes when I'm working with teams or remote, is to slow down. Know that everybody is exploring new tools, new working environments, new working constraints. And so that just means that we've got to plan ahead. I know in the chat, someone's like the challenge is overlapping, wrapping up the last PI and going into the next PI. There's that, there's an IP sprint, right? So holding on to the IP sprint was sometimes really hard to do, making sure that is still preserved. But even just as product people thinking about, all right, as I in the last couple of sprints, I need to start thinking about bringing in that voice of customer, planning out these collaboration sessions with my stakeholders, with other product people, to ensure that I am ready and I don't sort of slam it in, because we start slamming into the end of the PI and into the next PI, especially in this where we're distributed. Like just plan for everything to take twice as long. We're learning new tools, we're learning new ways to work. And so that's just going to have to be the pace at which we we proceed and we execute our planning planning
And
process.
and
So,
also, Kevin, like, just talking about what Rena was saying about that overlap. I mean, the fact that you have your portfolio allocation captured from a horizon perspective and from a feature and other allocation, and the fact that you have that artifact captured about what didn't make it to that lower canopy of the tree, those become your starting points for the next PI conversation. Okay, here's what we did. Here's what we agreed on last time. Here's how much we invested in Horizon 3. How is this going to change? And so you can use that instead of starting from square one.
that's a great point. Yeah, this first one might be even harder remotely. The next one's going to be a little easier. The next one's a little bit easier. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Well, Kevin and Kim, thank you so much for sharing your experience with everybody. I feel like this is certainly a topic that we could keep going, for hours and hours, but just everyone on the call will be sending out a link to this along with some answers to additional questions. And we'll also include an invitation to the next one that we're going to be doing next week. In the meantime, I would love to take, feedback from you. So I think you all have my email address. If you have any feedback about how we can improve or other topics you want us to cover, I'm all ears. Please send me some information about that as well.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.